every time is to say, hey, everybody, welcome. Roger Courville here. And as long as we're all here early, let's learn something. I said, imagine you come into an in-person seminar and there's some funny looking guy standing at the front door saying hello. Well, if we do that in in-person seminars and workshops, why don't we do that in virtual seminars and workshops or webinars? And I'm like, I don't know why. Anyway, so as long as we're live in real time and we're a couple minutes early, if you haven't found that little chat function yet, figure out where that is and share with me where you're joining from today.
Roger.
Woohoo! Hey everybody, Roger Courville here. Mark says, nice Christmas tree. Chris, or Xmas tree, or maybe that's a Hanukkah Kwanzaa tree, one of those kind of special purpose, multi-purpose trees. Hey, Shelly says, I see it. Hey, one of the things that I am going to do today is I want to talk with you and not at you. And one of those things that we're going to do is kind of be a lot less formal and a lot more you and I hanging out. So one of the things that I want to get you really comfortable with, if you haven't found it yet, is that little chat function. Many or most of you have already found that. But here's my opening question to you. And again, if you missed that, if you kind of scroll down to the bottom, move your mouse down to the bottom of your screen, and there's a little missing or hidden window that will pop up, and you can access chat there. My question to you is, what are the implications for VILT, meaning virtual instructor-led training? Adding that little V there is one of the ways that I've seen that designated. But here's my question for you. If this is a trend, if the proliferation of technologies is a trend, what are the implications for this macro trend when it comes to virtual instructor-led training, meaning real-time virtual instructor-led training, not unlike what we're doing today, in a sort of way. So, Lisa says, distraction is ubiquitous. Yeah, beautiful. In fact, by the way, if you haven't seen it, one of the things that you can do is undock that little group chat so that you can kind of open it up for, and keep it open, because that will be kind of served as a threaded chat function. Robert says, more social. Yes, in fact, that's actually a great point, Robert, because both of them were great points, which is that the expectation of being social is just inherent in a huge chunk of our population. Interesting statistic, one study that was done where they looked at the average length of a political soundbite on the nightly news. And interestingly enough, a number of years ago, more like a number of decades ago, the average soundbite was 43 seconds. Care to guess what it was a few decades later? 7.3 seconds. Barbara says 20 seconds. Lisa says 5. Ryan says 5. Shelly says, why would you not call today real time? I would totally call today real time. So here's you're all exactly correct on the same page, but I'm here to argue that I believe that just reverting back to the in-person experience that we have come to know and love, or we grew up knowing and loving, is not, in fact, solving all of our problems, because smartphones and a variety of devices have put us into a place where even that is under attack, meaning attention and engagement. And now when we move online, we've all attended the average webinar that just frickin' wants to put us to sleep. So my goal today is to give you a couple ideas, but more importantly, facilitate discussion that will turn you into a rock star, generate some raving fans. And we're going to get there by way of kind of 2 ideas that I'm going to share with you, the gap in the process. And then it's kind of like choose your own adventure. We're going to just open it up to questions. And the way to be most relevant, I believe, is to have an unconference style gathering. So many of you have seen the Simon Sinek golden circle, start with why kind of thing. And one of the things that I want to do is start there. I promise you it will start feeling slightly hypothetical, but I promise you it's not, because this is literally foundational to everything that I teach. it's because that I want you to own a new value creation framework, a new way of looking at the world. So if we look at communication behavior by place and time, and we segment that or parse it, much in a way that a marketer might segment or a list, for the purposes of driving valuation, optimization drives valuation. If we segment those things by place and time, and we take our little 4-box matrix here, 2x2 matrix, and do same and different on each of the axes, if you and I were in the same room at the same time, that would be an in-person experience. Fairly obvious. Just for the sake of filling in the boxes, if communication was occurring at a common location, but at a different time, asynchronously in terms of the communication, that would be like a kiosk in a mall or a computer in a computer lab. Communication where both the location and the communication are different would be literally anything that is published. A paper, an e-learning or web-based training course, a YouTube video. And for 100 years, the one way that we've had real-time, but at a distance, communication, same time, but different place, has been the telephone up until well, usably a couple decades ago. Does that make sense? So another question what are the implications for virtual instructor-led training category? Now, today, which quadrant are we in today of those 4 quadrants? Yep, pretty obvious. Exactly. And so let's just parse 2 of these. What is the comparison or contrast between the in-person experience and the virtual experience? They're both live in real time. Shelley says virtual is more inclusive. There we go. Becky says opportunities to do longer term workshops than you can easily do in a face-to-face meeting. An hour every week or 2, also possible to engage people in various parts of the world, right, which is distance or reach. But Becky actually brings up an interesting point. Let me put an exclamation point behind that. How easy or difficult is it, in a relative sense, to chunk your learning experience when you're virtual versus in person, right? There's a reason why we have these all-day or multi-day workshops, because it's expensive both in time and money to get people all into the same room, right? Shelley says, agree with Becky. Lisa says, more dependent on fragile technology. I would say yes and no, because there are less and more fragile technologies. Not all technology is fragile. Savable and revisitable. Thank you, Ryan. Yes. How difficult is it to make a recording and distribute a recording from an in-person workshop? In virtual, nonverbals are less obvious. Totally. Chris nailed that. Think live, in-person has more affordances than VILT. But VILT is better than e-learning. Oh, sweet. So let me actually draw an exclamation point behind something that Robert just said and kind of get through this section for the sake of a description. It's not better or worse. It's different. And here's one of the things that I would love for you to see this in a new way. If we were to take another arrow here and we just kind of draw it up this way, probably should use something other than red there, right? What do we have up here? What do we get with an e-learning course or something we publish on YouTube or write in a in a document manual that we don't get on this side of the line, the left side of the line? Slightly rhetorical question, but this line right down the middle here is a critical, let me even grab a different annotation tool here. This line right down the middle here is a critical line. because everything we do on the left-hand side is in real time, meaning we have a human-to-human potential contact that we do not have on the right side of the line. Shelley says interaction. Exactly. Chris says, I agree with Becky about the ad hoc. In fact, to me, everything on the right-hand side of the line, by definition, is formal training, right? We don't, I know these lines are getting blurry. Are you with me? But how do we have an informal interaction when we've published it out to the web? We don't. So again, the goal here is not to be uber hypothetical, except to say that one of the most common challenges that I see over and over and over, let me grab my little clearing button here, is that the problem isn't with technology, it's with value and communication. And when we think in terms of value, I'm going to pause slides and just share a little story with you, and we're going to be open up to questions here in about 2 seconds. I was speaking at an ATD conference, formerly ASTD, now more recently ASTD. And I sit down to lunch, and I'm at the table, and hey, who are you, and that kind of thing. And this gal goes, oh, what are you speaking on? I said, well, I'm talking about virtual classrooms. And she says like, oh, okay, then I don't need to come to your session. I'm like, oh, really? Tell me more. And because based on the way that you now see that I see the world, every one of those has a unique and irreplaceable part in the world, right? We're not throwing in-person training under the bus. There are things that it does better than anything else, but there are also things that those other quadrants do. Anyway, so she works for a very large shoe manufacturer with a swoosh on the side, and she said her division is moving to entirely on-demand video-based training. And I said, really? Meaning no possibility of interaction with a human being at all. She said, yep. Why? And I said, why? And she said, because it's perceived as cheaper. And I said, well, it is cheaper. What was going on inside of the big swoosh company in that division? They were looking at cost instead of effectiveness, right? Which is a business or value creation thing. And I'm not saying that everything should be live and synchronous. What I do think, however, is that it's not better or worse, it's different. There tends to be 4 or 5 critical things when you want to get your head inside of the value of a virtual classroom relative to the alternatives that you have. One is reach, right? Where am I going to reach them? One is frequency, like Becky brought up, right? Meaning we can, whether it's a time-based thing, like how do we take 6 hours of in-person classroom training and chunk it out into 6 one-hour sessions or 3 two-hour sessions. We take advantage of spacing effect or spaced repetition effect, which is better for learning, right? Interaction, sensory richness relative to the telephone only. Melissa says, I actually have the opposite experience with ad hoc conversations. In-person meetings can be very formal and involve long social negotiation related to who's allowed to speak. Yet I've spent many virtual hours working alongside others just brainstorming while working on common content. Interesting. Which, you know what, by the way, I'm going to draw that and then I'm going to move on to the next section here. But my world is not about technology. It's about people. And what Melissa just draws out is actually a soft skills thing. Right? Maybe the context changes a little bit because the people doing it online versus offline did or didn't manage that very well. But more often than not, when I see issues inside of an organization, it's not how do I use a piece of technology. It's about skills. Like, wow, what do I do if somebody's not a good citizen and muting themselves and unmuting themselves? I'm like, well, so go have one of the hard conversations you need to have. Right? Here's the quickie process. Every engagement that I ever do starts with this, and this is the last kind of foundational thing, which is to analyze, map, discover. Because obviously this is about engagement. If the audience doesn't show up from the neck up, they miss your message. And I think we need to become a student of a human experience. And I am a fan of parsing everything, taking everything apart, analyze, map, discover. Analyze everything that you do in person, map it to a new set of tools, and then say what is new or better or uniquely brought to the table by the technology that we have in front of you, which, by the way, is very different with Zoom versus GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar or Adobe Connect or one of several hundred other vendors on the market. So there's obviously your content, your ability to make meaning. And frankly, one of the things that I love to remember here is Christy, would you take a peek at the mutes there? Is that if we don't make meaning, we can dump all the information that we want and not affect change. I'm kind of preaching to the choir with NASAGA, right? And a university. But reaction, interaction, and taking action is ultimately our goal. And the question here is always, how are we going to make that happen in the new communication medium? I'm a big fan of reminding ourselves that the word education comes from the Latin educere, or educe, meaning to lead or draw out. It doesn't mean pound more crap in, which is, of course, a challenge. And then designing an experience, meaning designing an experiential or active learning thing. Again, preaching to the choir. I'm just kind of sharing with you my worldview. And then I think we can start with all of these things that we might want to do and then map them to our virtual presentation or class for the sake of giving you lots of tactics and tips on that very thing. One of the things that I will do for you here and now is actually suggest a couple resources. One, I've done multiple primary studies in the space, albeit formatted in a corporate way. One's called Translate In-Person Presentations Online, and I'm going to just chat out to you the link so you can get these resources that I've created. This page is not public. This is a private page just for you here in this session, but you can go get a couple different papers that I've written. Another is a book written by a friend of mine. Cassie's a longtime friend of mine who just published a book, and somebody you know today might be quoted in it, but it's called Interact and Engage. So if you just want lots of tactical ideas for what you can do, I would highly recommend her book as well. But here's where I'm going with this final thought. In a very simple way, start with what you do offline. And when I say start with what you do offline, I don't mean okay, my learning objectives and what I'm talking about. Because when people move into virtual classrooms, typically what they bring with them is the worst part of the experience, right? They start talking over PowerPoint. So analyze what you do offline, to me, says, okay, so how do you kick things off? How are you introduced? Well, how do you hand out handouts? Do you hand out handouts in the middle of the class? Are there times when you break people out into small groups and facilitate a discussion? And on and on and on. What is the difference between formal and informal interactions within your own class? And then we map it to a set of tools, which are going to be very different depending on which ones your organization is using it. And then third is just discover what is better or different. And let me give you an example of that. If we're in an in-person class and we say, go around the room, and there's 15 of us, we say, go around the room, and each of you take 1 minute to introduce yourself. Who are you? What do you do? What would you like to learn today? That takes a minimum of 15 minutes, assuming everybody sticks to 60 seconds. As opposed to if you do it online in, say, a chat function, now that same communication becomes simultaneous instead of sequential. Is that better? Is that worse? Do you want to be able to go back and analyze that? Do you want that saved for a future FAQs document? There's all kinds, not better or worse, different. And that's one of the things that I think that would be, is really useful. Analyze what you do in person, map to a new set of tools, discover what you can do new, better, or unique. And by the way, if you're kind of geeky like me, that's the medium theory or transmission theory of communication, which is that the medium not only always transmutes the nature of the sending and receiving of signal, but that every medium brings its own unique something to the table. And what we tend to do is we tend to first notice what we lose before we notice what we gain. All right. Chris and Christy, I'm going to take a sip of water. Let's just make sure we got to comments, questions, etc. And then, frankly, the rest of this is open up, you drive time. I'm going to open up a mind map, and we'll just